Welcome to Creative DIY Purpose. Today I have 5 thrifted items that are going to be receiving a makeover, and we're going to be using rice paper to transform the last 2. So come on, let's get started. For our first project, this wooden piece I picked up for $2.99. I applied 2 coats of gesso. That is an opaque primer. It provides really good coverage and there's no odor. So it's a great option for being able to prime indoors. After both coats of the gesso have dried, I made my own paint mixture from Rust-Oleum chalk paint in the chiffon cream, and I added bright white acrylic paint from Apple Barrel. 2 parts chiffon cream, 1 part bright white. After both coats of paint dried, I went along the edges with a baby wipe and just did some wet distressing. I had this small piece of fabric left over from a previous project and thought it would make a cute pocket. So the inspiration for today's projects is the upcoming planting season, which I cannot wait for. For the front of this pocket on the fabric, I'm going to use an IOD crockery stamp. Normally, I do run a low temp iron over the image to help set in the ink. However, today, by the time that I remembered, I had already hot glued the fabric onto the wooden frame. I wanted to bring the year on the crockery stamp, which was 1863, and use the typesetting stamps and just add that year right up in the top corner. After I gave that ink a few minutes to dry, I then took a ruler and measured to try to get that fabric pocket even and hot glued the 3 edges. I then added some greenery, a little jute bow, and a clip-on chalkboard. All right, so for project number 2, we're going to repurpose this mail organizer. I picked this up downstate for only a few dollars this summer when we went to go visit my son. No lie, they probably have 50 different antique malls and thrift stores. And when you walk out the door of one, you'll see another. It was so much fun. I wish I would have had more room in my vehicle. So I'm going to pop these off. And they came off very easy, just really small finishing nails. It's hard to believe that it stayed together with no glue for probably for decades. Let me know in the comments below if you had one of these or if you still do. So the way that these pockets were, you couldn't really fit too much in there. I know not too many bills. So what I'm going to try to do, maybe that's why they made it like that. But I'm going to pop these off. Try to leave a space in between each pocket to hold more and hopefully be able to get your hand down inside of it in case something gets down there that you want to be able to pull out. All right, so once I got the pockets off, went over it with my sander. And now I'm just taking a damp cloth and cleaning it off. I'm applying some of the antique wax that's been watered down. With that's drying, I'm going to put 2 coats of the paint right on the pockets. I ended up applying 2 coats of the paint and it adhered very well. It had full coverage, which was good since I didn't even think of adding the primer to it. Before the paint had dried all the way through, I just took a baby wipe and went around all the corners just for some distressing. So I was very excited. I found a pack of Scrabble letters. I believe I got them at Dollar General, but I'm not 100% sure. So I wanted to take these letters and make them so they're the same color as the back of this piece. So using a paintbrush, I brushed on some of the watered down antique wax I did have to apply it twice just to get it to be the same shade as that back piece. And I just wiped off any of the extra wax. So I'm going to let them sit here for a little bit and dry. Then I'm going to grab some E6000 and we're going to put some labels on these boxes. I did hammer the pockets back onto the main board. It did give a lot more room for each one. All right, so now that I've got them lined up, I did a strip of glue right down the middle. I thought that that would be a little bit easier. You have to let me know how you like this transformation. I was excited to finally be able to repurpose one of these. I picked up this basket at the thrift store for $2.38. I like that it's a sweet little wall pocket. It just needs a little update. So I applied 2 coats of the acrylic and chalk paint. I applied it with a chip brush so that it was a little bit easier to get down into all of the cracks. I wanted to give the basket a little contrast. I brushed on some of the watered down antique wax from Waverly on any of the parts I didn't apply paint to. I then wiped it back with a cloth. It did come out a little bit darker than I had in mind, and some of the orange still did pop through. So I took the same color paint and just with a very dry brush, that helps soften it as well as give it a little of a weathered look. Project number 4 is this empty game holder case. And yes, I bought it at a thrift store. It's one of those things that I get home and I'm like, what was I thinking? I didn't bother taking off the sticker because I'm going to apply 2 coats of the gesso and 1 coat of the paint mixture that I used on the other project. And they both covered it up really well. All right, so here I am just taking my cordless sander because I will use any excuse to break that out. And it just went along the edges because I had a little bit of paint buildup on the corners and I wanted to make it nice and smooth. I found a vintage wheelbarrow print on the graphicsfairy.com. I put it into Canva and just added some text, and that way it will fill up the whole space. I did make a couple errors that I want to let you guys know about when using the rice paper. You can see how the colors are different between the 2 pages. I wasn't even thinking, and I printed the one on the left side that I'm holding and came right out and Mod Podged it. It does run a little bit. I'll let you know how I fix that in a minute, but I did not give the ink time to absorb and dry into the paper. Now, when you do purchase the rice paper that I have linked below, the sheets are longer than a traditional sheet of printer paper. When you cut the edges off, though, keep them because they're the perfect size for bookmarks or for other projects. And you can also water paint on the rice paper, and that would be a fun project for kids. So here I am just Mod Podging on the rest of the image. I love the leather handle on this piece. So because I didn't wait for the ink to dry, the letters in antique were a little smeared, and you can definitely see a distinct line where the 2 images came together. So I'm taking some of the paint and just dry brushing it on. And it's nice because it added an aged look and a more blended look throughout the graphic. It did cover up the smearing on the word antique, but it didn't really fix the seam, but that's okay. Project number 5, we're going to be upcycling this particle wood sign. It had an image glued on the front, was almost like a cardboard. So I removed that, sanded it, applied 2 coats of the gesso. Now I'm going to apply 2 coats of the paint that I used earlier, wet distressing the edges. Using watered down antique wax from Waverly, I'm going around the edges, wiping it back, and then I will go around one more time around the outside, allowing it to sit on there for about 5 minutes to let it soak in and get a little bit darker. Next, I printed out on rice paper an image that I found on Canva and a Bible verse that I thought was fitting for the theme today. So just like tearing decoupage paper or tissue paper, you can do the same with the rice paper. And it's easier, I think, than the tissue paper since it's thicker. You have a little bit more control. I thought giving it ripped edges would help add a little bit more character to the piece. I am applying Mod Podge and I'm going in every direction. I am applying it thicker because I'm hoping to get a little bit of texture underneath this piece. You can see here how durable the rice paper is because I actually pull it up and have to reposition it 3 times. It's definitely very easy to work with. I'm taking a thick cotton cloth that has a lot of texture and pushing down to try to see if I could get the texture to show and dry like that. And it did. So that seems a really quick and easy way to add more texture to a piece. And definitely could add some wax up over the top of it or even dry brush to bring that texture out even more. I just added a simple jute tie up at the top. I'm going to take some straw and some of the fabric from earlier and just make a really simple messy bow. I was curious to see if the rice paper would soak in some of that watered down wax and pull it in to the paper. And it did, and it pulled it in more evenly, I think, than the tissue paper. I wiped that back after letting it sit there for a couple minutes. Friends, I want to thank you so much for joining me this week. If you haven't had a chance to see the bonus video that I posted on Tuesday, be sure to check that out on more ways that you can use rice paper. And it also shows a few ideas on ways that we can repurpose empty glass jars and bottles. I will also link the blog post below for some ideas on indoor decorative birdhouses for you. Have a super blessed week, and I will see you next Sunday.